All right, we are back this week. Chad unfortunately had some family stuff, but we'll be back with him next month. I'm here today with Brandon Hudson. I appreciate everyone who has tuned in over the last few weeks to this new weekly time. And yeah, I guess we'll just get started, and hopefully people can comment in the comment section. Be sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your questions or comments about what we're talking about. So to start it off, I was just in there watering my grow room. I started flowering December 23rd. And so have maybe a month to go, but the plants are really stacking nicely. I've put some photos up, and I'll put another video up here shortly of the room and where we're at. But it got me thinking about like when to harvest, because I know when I was first learning how to grow, my very first harvest, I was doing a ton of reading, and everyone said, look at the trichomes, and when they're 50% milky and 50% amber, that's when you harvest. And now that I've been growing for a while, I met Brandon. I know he's got some opinions on this. Well, first off, what are your guys' thoughts about when you should harvest, and what your key indicators are? And Brandon, what do you look for when you go to harvest a plant?
Yeah, so me personally, it's really hard to say without knowing the genetic. Once you've run a particular cultivar a couple of times, I feel like you start to know it better, know the nuances of that plant better. Trichomes is a great way to go. I'm personally, I'm looking for, the stigma to kind of, once those start to turn orange, red, brown, whatever, once those start to recede back into the plant, that plant needs to come down. But I'm just visually kind of looking to see that change in color, and then once I get there, then I start looking at the trichomes with a loop, and that 50-50 seems to work pretty well. Again, there are some cultivars, outliers, that might not ever pull that stigma back in, and so that's when we want to look at the trichome. And again, it really looks it really comes down to knowing your particular cultivar and getting comfortable with it and scoping it to know, did you get a little bit better terpene expression, letting it go one more week. I love what Soma says about, when to harvest. So Soma says, if you are 100% certain, no doubt in your mind, that those plants are supposed to come down this week, do it next week. And so, I like that mantra. Obviously, production facilities can't do that, so they've got to be a little tighter.
Yeah, I'm assuming most of the people on the YouTube lives are home growers, so yeah, we'll go with that assumption. And so yeah, we do have a little more flexibility around when we harvest. But one of the things that I think about too, I get nervous because I'm guessing everyone who's been growing long enough has lost a crop to botrytis or powdery mildew. This time of year, right now, like last night, we had record cold. I'm dealing with trying to maintain high enough temperature to offset the humidity that I want to have in the room, looking at a VPD chart. And so I get nervous because I know my room is not as tight as I want it to be. So like this morning I went in there and I was at like 75 Fahrenheit and 71% humidity. And I'm like, oh, that's not great. So I worry that as I know as the plant gets older, it's more susceptible to disease. And sometimes that extra week can be the difference between getting a harvest and not getting a harvest. So
100%.
I don't know. I just want to bring up a counterpoint to your thing of always let it go a little longer. Plus, as I understand it, doesn't the at some point the THC will start to degrade a little bit, or is that purely just in curing? This is not the side of the industry that I am as knowledgeable about. I'm much more focused on like soil and cultivation aspects, less on harvest and curing. So I'm going to defer to you on this.
You can let it go too long to where your cannabinoids start to oxidize and you will lose potency. You can lose terpenes, so if you let it go too long, there is a point diminishing returns, and then you start to actually have negative effects if you let it go too long. And like you just said, and the same thing goes for curing, sometimes I'm seeing some, I've got some PM, I'm going to chop this, they want to get something, and they're like, how hard should I push the cure? And a lot of times that's a fine line, because just like you said, you want to get it, I would rather cure a little bit too fast, lose a little bit of terpene and not lose my crop, than pushing it and then losing my crop. And the same thing with curing, if in doubt, for newer growers, I would prefer them to dry a little too fast, maybe not get the same expression that you and I are looking for, but at least they got a harvest and they've got something in their hand that they can use.
Yeah, I would just throw out there that if you are at least 50 days into flower, to start really watching your plant, pull apart the buds, make sure you're not getting any mold or mildew. And if you do have any sign of that, that means you either need to harvest right away, or you need to consider that maybe this crop, there's just too many spores in the room now and the crop's no good. So yeah, do you want to comment on this question regarding different Billy buds? I heard terpene character and maturity can be a guide for ripening. Is this true?
Yeah, that's kind of what I said earlier, was that,
Okay.
you want to look at trichomes and you want to see if you're receding and that kind of stuff. But once you know a cultivar, unless there's something that's happened, if something happened that impacted your round, deleteriously, then maybe terpenes aren't the best way. But with cultivars that I've known, like, I run that Stay Puffed. I run, there's certain cultivars I'll run at least, the Oishi, I'll run at least one plant every round, just because I love how they taste and that kind of thing. So when I get certain cultivars like that, and I know them really well, and I've run them, many, I've run that Stay Puft probably 20 rounds. That's where, I'm in there smelling the plants and pulling buds open, and I'm looking for that terpene expression. And I might let a plant mellow in the bed for another week. Again, I'm not on a production schedule, so it doesn't really matter. But if my terpene expression is not where I want it to be, I'll definitely let it sit for another week.
Right. We do have another couple. Well, first off, I just want to say, so sorry, Southern Grown Organics.
Yeah,
it is tough.
Right.
Dude, we're neighbors. I'm over on Fox Island near Gig Harbor, so we're real close to you. But yeah, really sorry to hear that. There is another question. I once heard the 15% amber rule was a simplification of an older rule that was to harvest sativas at 30% and indicas at 0%, meaning the first sign of amber. Any truth to that?
The problem with that is, one, where indica and sativa make, they're useful terms for explaining a specific kind of experience, as far as the scientific nomenclature, we're away from that. And what's available to folks these days is some sort of hybrid. And so, I wouldn't know how to apply a rule like that to a hybrid. Yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's more a growth habit thing. So like, I agree. Indica and sativa probably need to go away as terms. They're not useful anymore because all the genetics are diversified at this point. But I will say, you have this association with sativas that they take longer to flower. They have larger internode spacing. They have, fluffier buds. They're taller plants. All of these sorts of things that we associate with, a sativa or sativa dominant plant. They're more heady, more front brain versus couch lock. I think those plants in general, you want to let run a little bit longer.
100%.
from what I can see, but that's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. I think you just kind of have to judge the plant's maturity. I don't know. Again, I was never one to get in there and say, like, I had trouble with this idea of like, is this 15% amber? Or is it 10% amber? Is it 25%? Like, I'm not quantifying it. So you kind of just get a feel for it, I guess, to a certain extent. And if it's your first time, maybe when you start to see a substantial amount of, everything's milky, so you don't have any more clear trichomes, and you're starting to see some amber trichomes, you could say, okay, well, now I can consider harvesting, or maybe I harvest a little bit of it and let a little bit go longer and compare and see what I like better too. Because
Lots
it
of home
also is about the
growers.
experience, right? Like
Yeah.
people like different experiences on it.
Lots of home growers will top their plants, take all the buds at the top, and then come back in 2 weeks later and take the bottoms because they've had more light and a little opportunity to mature. I think that, like anything in cultivation, we can kind of set up guardrails. And like that conversation you and I had this morning talking about lab testing and protocols and that kind of stuff, one person's estimation of consistency, or like you're saying, what percentage or that kind of stuff, you and I might both look at the same plant and perceive. You might go, I don't know, it's about 10%. And I might go, I don't know, about 20%. It's like when we did those what was it, the Blue Mat test at Soil Summit, where you pick up the different pots. The human body's just not sensitive enough to know, is that 70 M bar, 80 M bar, I don't know. And so I would just kind of use all these rules as a guideline. So yeah, if you look at your trichomes and everything's clear, it's way too early to pull. If you get in there and everything is milky and you're starting to get some amber, it's time to pull it down. If everything's gone amber, then you're oxidizing, and you should pull it earlier next round. So again, I just think of it as guardrails, especially for home growers.
All right, now we're getting back into stuff that I feel a little more confident talking about. So Fuzzy Bunny asks, I have Kiss biochar soil that's been sealed in plastic totes for about a year. Now, this could apply to any soil. So even if you don't have Kiss organic soil, this would be the same comments. What is the best way to bring it back to life? So my first comment, and don't take this personally, Fuzzy Bunny, would be, please don't put your soil into sealed anything, because it's alive and we want it to have oxygen access to oxygen and air exchange. So that being said, it's probably okay. What I would suggest doing is getting it out of the sealed totes. If all you can do is take the lid off, then that would be good. If you can take the lid off and then pour it out into a pile, even better. If you can drill holes in the tote because you can't put it in a pile, do that. Just think about air exchange, and how can you get air to the soil? So the next thing you're probably going to need to do is add water back in. After a year, it's probably
I'd love to dump on a tarp, not to interrupt. That's just fine. Optimally, if you've got stuff that's been sealed up, dump it out on a tarp, let some oxygen get in there, move the soil around.
That'll make watering it easier too. And I'd want to water it with something that is like a dram water breaker, or something that's going to give me a smaller droplet size, so I can get better surface area of the water to get better coverage. Because that soil is probably going to be hydrophobic. You could put a couple drops of like a surfactant like Thermex 90 in there, or Yucca, aloe, even a couple drops of like Dawn dish soap or Dr. Bronner's would help. You don't need much. It's not going to damage anything to just use a little bit. It just makes the water a little bit wetter and it won't just rush through. The next thing I would want to do after I've thought about oxygen and thought about water would be to get the microbes a little more active by adding a little bit of a food source. And that could be a little bit of unsulfured molasses, maybe a tablespoon per gallon watered in, as a way to give a little bit of sugars and food to the microbes. Or even better, if you have some organic alfalfa meal lying around, just throwing a handful in there is another great option. And then just giving the soil a little bit of time to recover. Anything you want to add to that, Brandon?
No, I'm just glad you said alfalfa. That's my favorite to kickstart an old pile, whether it's a compost pile or soil that's been sitting. I love alfalfa. It's amazing. You can throw a handful into a cube, into a tote, and come back the next day, and it's super hot. You can stick your hand in there and feel the difference. So yeah, those are my favorites. Unsulfured blackstrap molasses, and as a kind of foliar, just spray that out, and then alfalfa.
I'm going to skip a question and come back to it just because I've been talking for so long. So this one's for you, Brandon. How in depth is the soil consultation through Kiss Organics? Because he needs a true understanding of what they've done to their beautiful soil.
Um, so it's pretty in depth. When we do a soil analysis for someone, it really depends on their goals. 90% of it, we're looking at kind of the MPK side, fertility targets. We have sufficiency targets, and then we have balance relationships. And so whether you end up talking to me or Tad or Ben even, um, we're going to go through the entire Malick soil report line by line, all the pertinent information, and say, here's where you are, here's where you want to be, here's how to get there. And then we try to give, um, we've gone back and forth on this, because some growers really just want a recipe. They just want to know 2 cups of this, a cup of this, and a cup of this, and they want to be done. I tend to be, everybody that knows me knows I'm really chatty, and I tend to give information overload. But that's what I want as a grower. I want to know why I'm doing what I'm doing, not just do something. So that's what we provide. And so we do a really, what I think is in my opinion, a really thorough job of explaining, where you are and what you need to do. And then we go through the paste and we look at everything there and make sure that you're in balance. And then, if there's other issues, heavy metals, pathogens, if you've got if there's bad actors, if you've got too much sodium, too much chloride, we'll walk you through how to handle, flushes and that kind of stuff. If you've got trace element
Can you
issues.
can you see my screen right now, Brandon? Is it showing the
I,
soil test from my
I,
house?
yep,
Okay,
yep.
so this is the one that Ben and I do. Brandon, when he does them, it looks a little different. We're still standardizing, but the information in terms of application rate is going to be exactly the same here. So you get like your sample location. This is the one I did last year before my current grow. If you want to see that on our Instagram or even on YouTube here, you can see all the numbers are plugged in. We plug them in manually, and then we go back and we say, okay, your phosphorus reserves are low. Please add 1.5 cups of fish bone meal. That's also going to bring in nitrogen as well as phosphorus. So we've accommodated that in our nitrogen recommendation. And based on where we're at here, we're not adding any more nitrogen for my grow. So this is sort of what you'll receive from us in terms of what you need to do to get a balance for cannabis. And then we were also doing additional information here that Brandon likes to include on all of his tests that show you sort of where to go with your recommendation. But yeah, that at least give you an idea of what we're doing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and it's funny to me that I'm the one adding this because Tad always reminds me of this because I get real tunnel focused on fertility. And so when we're talking about soil and Chadwick's wanting to, he says he wants to understand his soil fully. There's three legs to the stool, on soil. And so I focus on the mineral fertility, but there's also the biology and the tilth, the physical aspects of the soil. And so those are other areas that, we're not going to ask Logan Labs about your biology or your tilth, but that's something that we can work with a grower. There's certain things that, if Tad and I see a specific nutrient not showing up in the plant, but we know it's in the soil based off of a soil report, then we're going to investigate your cycling and your biology. We're going to investigate your tilth and environmental aspects. And so it all works together. It's all, it's pretty thorough, but it all works together.
Yeah, and just a comment. So we usually work with Logan Labs. Those allow us to do the testing analysis much more accurately because we've seen literally thousands of these now at this point, probably, versus a test from another lab, which is going to be calibrated slightly differently. And we actually met with Logan this morning to talk about maybe putting out some more information around this, because there's a lot that people don't understand about the testing process, myself included. I learned some things today about how they're doing it, and how, where the soil test is very robust, and also where there's potential for error on the laboratory side. So yeah, I hope to follow up with that. But yes, if you do a soil test, Logan Labs just makes it a lot easier for us to do the math and to work on that. So thank you for that comment.
And just like anything, like we were talking about, guardrails with the trichomes and looking at that, soil tests are guardrails. It's only going to be as accurate as the sampling. And so, if you're not in a position to turn a bed completely, if you're a production round, and you're taking a sample at week 7 for a 9-week run, you can't dig up your soil and turn it over. That test is not going to be as accurate as somebody like me, who I can chop, harvest, turn my soil, take a sample. That's going to be a lot more homogeneous. And so the more thoroughly turned, more homogeneous, the more accurate the test is. But even if it's not, it still provides a guardrail that will keep you out of trouble. So I still find, even in those areas where the tests aren't as robust, I still find them very valuable.
Nice. All right. I don't want to spend too much time on this question just because powdery mildew is a bit complicated. But I do want to answer it a little bit. So no, fresh air exchange is not necessarily important for PM mitigation. If there's no spores in the room and you're not doing air exchange, there's nowhere for the powdery mildew to come from. However, there probably is spores in the room, and there are things you can do to reduce spore pressure. But at the end of the day, it's really more about keeping your environment dialed in. There are definitely advantages to air exchange, but I don't think PM mitigation is necessarily one of them. And I just want to add that powdery mildew is not systemic, because I hear people still repeating that, and it's just simply not true based on what we know about this pathogen. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to mitigate PM. I don't think fresh air exchange is one of them. I do think getting good airflow, proper airflow, is really important. And then being aware that once you have PM, high spore content, if you're seeing PM on your leaves, you probably already have a ton of spores in the room. You may be just pushing those spores around your room too with your airflow. So it's definitely a challenging pathogen once it's sort of firmly entrenched in your grow room.
Silica, good airflow, good calcium, proper pruning techniques,
proper VPD
and exclusion. That's the best you can do.
I don't think I ever told you this, but when I first started growing, oh man, this was like 25 years ago. One of my brother's friends sent me this picture of their plant, and they're like, it is just covered in trichomes, and the whole thing was white. It was all powdery mildew, and I'm sure they smoked it, and I cringe thinking about it now. But it's how we learn, I guess. There's no one there to teach you if you've never grown a plant before and you've never seen it. Like,
oh, I remember the first time I saw a cannabis plant, because like we were buying weed, and we saw crappy, swaggy, bricked up weed in high school a lot and that kind of stuff. But my dad and my uncle were growers. And so like that bag, so like I would show a friend a plant, on the sly, and they would be like, what is that? That doesn't look like weed. And I'm like, well, that's what it looks like before it gets, stomped on and packed into the bottom of a semi and snuck across the border. And so, yeah, I think it's pretty wild, like what a beautiful, healthy cannabis plant looks like the first time you see one. I'll never forget it. I've never met a plant I didn't like.
Oh, I have. Not a cannabis plant, but I've met
Oh
other
yeah,
plants that I
yeah, yeah,
absolutely hate.
yeah. We both don't
Um,
like comfrey,
yeah.
which
Well,
we'll get.
I
Well,
I don't hate
with
comfrey like you do, but it's not my favorite for a few reasons. Anyway, uh, wow, you guys are coming up with some great questions, and we got a ton. So we should
I just
probably
saw
start knocking
Dwayne.
these out.
Yeah, I just saw Prairie State asking about Bill McKibben's books on his
Yeah.
new substrate book, and so this is Bill's old book, his original Art of Balancing Soils, and this is a great book. If, you know, and if people want to study, if you're not allergic to reading, don't want to talk to an idiot like me, read some of these books. You know, and so this is Bill's newest book that I'm aware of. I don't think that there's any updated information on a substrate one. So, but just wanted to reach out to Dwayne on that.
One thing I did learn recently from Trinity over at Logan Labs is that Bryant Mason is now doing the cannabis Rex
Yep.
for Logan, which is an awesome change. Bill's a great guy. I have a ton of respect for him. We have a great relationship. He's very vegetable production focused. For well, he's great for farmers, but I think Bryant's real strength is these soilless media, what we call living soil, where we sort of the realm we live into. So yeah, it was awesome to see them make that move. And so yeah, if you get your recommendation through Logan now, it should be Bryant doing it. Um, so yeah. You know, if you go, I always tell people, you know, if you go with us, if you go with Bryant, I don't think you can go wrong either way. We're very close on our recommendations and approaches to cultivation. So, yeah, I'll never get upset if someone went with you know, Brian's Rex over ours or as a company. He's a great guy, so I love
Yeah.
supporting him.
Yeah. Can't say enough good things about him. And if you are somebody that wants to kind of take the reins yourself, there is, you know,
Yeah.
I've taken every class that, if you can name it, I've taken it. And Bryant Mason, if you want to learn how to balance soil reports, that's hands down, that's the best class. And Dwayne, you're right, there is supposed to be a third book. I just haven't heard anything about a release date or anything like that.
Yeah, if you do decide to take Bryant's class, he did put out a coupon code, Kiss Organics, all capital letters, all one word. I think it knocks a couple $100 off the cost of the course. So just want to mention that. All right. Another one for you. Going back here a little bit in the chat from Damien. Brandon, can you give us a quick rundown on what your grow cycle looks like? How do you start seeds, up pot? When do you flip? How you top dress? I mean, that's a huge question. Maybe you can just give us a 2-minute sort of rundown of the basics.
Yeah, so I mostly work from, you know, I hunt a lot of genetics. Anybody who knows me closely knows I'm constantly popping packs and running through seeds. That's kind of a side project. And so once I get a cultivar that I like from seed, and I usually start seeds in either a cup or a paper towel method. I'd like to do a little splash of peroxide. If they're really old, I might cold treat them, throw them in the fridge for a couple of days, 48 hours before I try to pop them. But then I'll get a female that I like, and I'll take clones of that. And so I like to have a well-rooted clone. I'll usually go into a 4-inch pot. Again, I'm very restricted. Tad and I both don't have enough electricity to run the grows that we would like to grow. And so I keep really small moms, usually 2 feet or smaller. And I will take, I'll get those, almost root bound in a 4-inch pot. It really depends on the planting density and how many cultivars I want to run. Because again, I'm always hunting stuff, so I tend to overpack my beds. I'll go, 20 plants in a 4x4. I usually veg for only a week, 2 at the max, with those kind of planting densities. It's all about the canopy. So you could have 1 plant in there and fill up a 4x4, or you could have 50 plants in there and fill up a 4x4 just as fast as you can get it. And then, I like to do, I'm doing it right now. I just flipped on Sunday night. I've got about, I don't know, maybe another hour, 2 hours left. I'm almost done trimming out all the lowers. And we usually show stuff like that on Patreon and that kind of stuff. but I think it's really important to get a really just savage trim out. All my plants look like sad little Charlie Brown Christmas trees. 2 days later, poof. Cannabis there's no plant I've ever worked with that responds to herbivory the same way that cannabis does. It just puts on exponential growth when you cut it. And then I don't do a lot of top dressing. If I see something in my plant, I try to get all of mine in kind of the KISS way as a one-time pre-plant amendment, and that's designed to reduce labor. A lot of our focus is on reducing labor for folks, and so we try to have as few touches as possible. A lot of times I do some secondary potassium applications and that kind of thing, and then it just really depends on the cultivar, how long it's going to go. That's a real quick.
Yeah, in terms of starting seeds, we have a seed starter mix that's just peat based, very low fertility because the seeds don't want a lot. You like to put them in there, and then when they get a little bit bigger, we transition them into a soil that has a little more fertility. We call it our veggie mix, and then from that you go into the full fertility soil. So at least 3 transplants. Yeah, and that's the sort of the basics of it.
And I keep it really simple. Keep it simple. Organics, KISS Organics. I don't. I've been growing for 40 years. I've tried like pretty much any special sauce you can name, from tricontinol to sprouted seed teas to ferments to just whatever. And I really don't think that, for me, I don't feel like they're necessary. They're fun. But, and this is something that Ben always says, Dr. Ben Higgins, that works with us. If there's not a statistically relevant increase or bump, don't spend the money next round. And that's where I've landed with a lot of this stuff. So I've played around with all kinds of stuff, and I have a really very streamlined, very simple SOP, because one, I'm real focused on labor, and I feel a moral obligation to try to provide the least expensive alternatives for growers.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on that really quick, and then we'll move on to the next question. For people who aren't familiar, and there's other people that grow like this, like I see Dwayne's in the chat. He's got a phenomenal looking grow of exactly what we're talking about right now. But you have a bed of soil. Let's just say a 3x3 or a 4x4 bed that is in your flowering room that always stays on 12-12 for the most part, and you will go from you'll transplant directly into the bed. You might have anywhere from 6 to 9 plants in a 4x4 space, and you've already amended that soil, or it's brand new soil that has good fertility. And then you're just watering your plant through the growth cycle. You're training your plant, you're pruning, you're scouting, and then at the a few weeks out from the end of your cycle, if you're on a timeline, you would get a soil test and send that into Logan. They'll send us the results. We do an analysis, and then we send you back exactly what you need, which I showed you for my room. Wasn't much. It was probably under $10 worth of nutrients, and then I was up and running again for the next cycle. So it's super easy, and it's super affordable, and you don't have to follow a whole complicated feeding schedule and have like 50 products in your grow. And that was really the goal of all this, and that's how Brandon grows. That's how he found KISS Organics, and then I ended up hiring him because wanted to be part of our team. So that kind of covers.
It all starts with the pot size, though. I just said Texas Weed Hopper said this last round challenged him because he was in 7 gallons. So you really need a 10-gallon or larger to do this. Otherwise, you're going to be feeding fish or top dressing or something along those lines. And then where it gets complicated is where we start to tweak our environmentals. Like, again, Texas Weed Hopper is asking about multiple cultivars. How do you keep those happy? I treat the room, I split the difference. I treat the room, if there's one plant that's struggling, I'm not going to grow that plant anymore. I need stuff that will play well with others. And then, I do make little subtle changes to PAR levels, CO2, Like everybody knows I preached to drop the CO2 the last couple of weeks. Temperature, VPD, relative humidity, all those things get tweaked a little bit. But as far as the fertility, moisture management, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, speaking of CO2, normally when I go in my room, it's right around 1,000 because that's what I have it set at. And I have to go in there because my room's not dialed or automated. I have to go in and manually adjust my dehumidifier when lights come on and off. And I also have to adjust my heater. So I went in there today and it was like over 2,000 when I went into the room. And normally it's at 1,000. And I just thought that was interesting. I don't know if it was because it was so cold or something. It's just the stage of growth of the plants. I'm not really worried about it.
Where did it land?
I think I was around 2,000. I have it set, I think, at 2,200 or 2,500, where it will an exhaust fan will kick on and kick the CO2 out of the room. But yeah, I don't know. I was just sharing an observation from today that kind of
I've got mine set at 1,600. I'll kick it out. I do see, colder temperatures, I usually see the CO2 go down because the biology is not respiring as much. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and I know when you water too, you'll usually see your CO2 fluctuate after a watering event if you're hand watering. So anyway, moving on. Noah, I'm recognizing some of these names. Noah asks, I'm brewing a tea, but one of my tents, the lights come on at night, 1 a.m. So if you brew a tea, will the tea still be good 10 hours later when the lights come on? I'm assuming you're talking about an aerated compost tea. If we're talking about a tea that has no biology in it, then yes, totally fine. If it's a tea that has biology in it, if you keep your...
Is this 10 hours after like a 28, 32 hour brew? Or
I'm assuming that you're brewing for 24 hours and then you're tacking on an additional 10 hours. Okay. So we'll go with that assumption. Yeah, 10 hours is not long enough to brew an aerated compost tea for the total brewing length. So assuming you brew for 24 hours, actually what I would probably do is brew for 20 hours and then apply a tea at 20 hours and apply the tea at 30 hours and call it good. But I would make sure that my air pump was running the entire time. And then I would swap, if I did 2 tea applications, I would swap that for next time, because at 30 hours, you're going to have a very different microbial consortia than you would at 20 hours. Around 24 hours, you start to kind of hit your sort of like peak diversity. And then when you start getting further out, 30, especially when you get to like 40 hours plus, you'll start to see the same morphology. That's the shape of bacteria and the same morphology of flagellate. And they'll just kind of flip-flop for the rest of the time you have that tea brewing, and you lose all your diversity. I mean, I remember there was I think it was Vermicrop was the company that said you could store your tea in the fridge and you could brew for a week. And I wrote to them multiple times telling them, like, look under the microscope, like what you're saying just doesn't add up. But they also sold their company for millions of dollars, I think, to Sunlight Supply or GH. So what do I know?
Right.
They were great marketers, because being able to brew for a week or store your tea in the fridge is really convenient for a grower. And it's not like it's necessarily dangerous, but when you shut off aeration, that does get a little scarier, because now you brewed up all these microbes that no longer have access to oxygen. So anything that's an anaerobe, which some anaerobes, like some of our worst pathogens, are facultative anaerobes. They're going to be more successful at reproducing, utilizing food sources. And so you could potentially, not say this is going to happen every time, but you could potentially be brewing up E. coli or salmonella or something else that would be bad for your grow. As a general rule, if your tea stinks, don't put it on your plants. If it smells good, it's probably okay. But yeah, there are some nuances to brewing tea. All right. Moving on here. Actually, you know what? Let's come back to this. I've been talking too much. Brandon, your turn. How will you cover how you turn your soil?
Yeah, so I am a no-till grower outside. inside that's in actual real field soil, in situ soil, in a substrate, a manufactured substrate, which is, one of these peat cocoa mixes like we provide. I want to move all that soil, and I want to mix it as homogeneously as possible, because I'll get the most accurate NPK results for my soil reports, and that's my area of interest. That's what I'm most excited and interested in. And so I've got this little cheapy, it's Kaya sized. It's like a perfect little kid's. So it's probably only like 1.5 feet, 2 feet long handle on a little. It's like a little tiny potato spade, and I'll just get in there and just dig my bed. I can turn it over in 2 minutes. But I like to make sure that I kind of dig from the corners to the middle. Then I'll start turning the middle, and then I just make sure that I move that soil around very, very thoroughly. But I'm doing it all by hand.
Yeah, I don't. Well, first of all, I wear a respirator when I do this because I think it's a good idea. But on top of that, like, I'm allergic to mold and dust and literally breathing. It's
Everything.
unfortunate. So, yeah, it's a good idea to wear PPE. So what I will do is I just reach in there with my hands and literally just do this. And the reason I do it, because I know this no-till thing is very popular and I fully support it outdoors. But the reason, and if you want to read a more in-depth conversation around this on our website, you can go look at, I think it's called, it's on our blog page. It's something related to is no-till the best way to grow indoors or something is what I titled it. You can read my full thoughts. But one of the things to consider is the bulk density of your soil. When let's say you fill your bed with soil in your garden and you come back at the end of the grow season, it's like dropped down 4 inches or whatever. You're like, where did that soil go, right? It didn't all end up in your tomato plant. Some of it is organic matter that broke down through all the microbes, but some of it is just compression, that bulk density, those things, just the weight of the soil is just slowly squishing it too. And so I like to fluff it back up. I don't see that necessarily disturbing the microbes in a way that is a real detrimental issue in living soils indoors. So yeah, that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah. Hands are great. A little shovel or something. Obviously you don't want to tear a hole in your beds or anything, so be careful, but the more you can turn it, the better.
All right. Is it beneficial using mycorrhizal fungi in a non-living soil? Also, is there a difference using the fungi with organic versus inorganic nutrients? Yes. These are great questions, Heather. So is it beneficial? Yes, absolutely. There is research that shows with mycorrhizal fungi in soils that are not necessarily being fully organically managed. Still have benefits in terms of increasing the surface area of the plant's roots to where you get better protection against drought, better nutrient uptake, better cycling of nutrients, calcium, primarily phosphorus. Yes, so absolutely. That being said, the challenge though with inorganic nutrients and even with organic nutrients is that we don't have a lot of phosphorus, available phosphorus in the soil when we're doing the mycorrhizal inoculation, because that plant, it's going to be putting out signals, and if it's getting all the phosphorus that it needs, it's not going to form that relationship, that actual infection with mycorrhizal fungi if P levels are high, and there's a lot of research to support that. So that would be the one caveat in regards to mycorrhizal fungi. So real world example, I've got a small cannabis plant and a rooted clone, let's say, and I'm putting it into media. And let's just say peat-based media or cocoa, whatever. I'm not going to be watering with something like CFOS or fish hydrolysate that has phosphoric acid in there, because now I'm feeding the plant the P it needs at the same time as trying to inoculate it to form a relationship with a microbe that's going to provide P and has a bunch of other benefits. So you just have to be thoughtful about it. And then there's a whole bunch that goes into like picking your mycorrhizal product, its viability, all of those things. It's a much longer conversation. I will just add that if you are being tested and regulated for heavy metals, then you may want to consider holding off on mycorrhizal fungi because it helps uptake all nutrients. And so that is just one consideration. All right.
So that's why I like when I have rooted clones, I just set them, I'll put like a paper plate or a seed tray out. I'll dump mycorrhiza. I use the Dynamico in case anybody is wondering what I use. And then I'll just take my rooted clones, and there's no phosphorus. These plants are not getting fed anything. And so, I should be getting good infection rates, just by doing that. And then I can go into my soil.
Couple quick thoughts because from the comments, I want to let you guys know we are working on a course. Brandon and I have been working on one that would be fairly comprehensive, but it's taken us a number of years to make progress on this. So just want to mention that it's in the works. So stay tuned on that. A couple other comments was, CT grows. I just want to show this really quick. 4th run, same soil, no-till, awesome. There's a lot of guys that do no-till. I'm not here to bash it. I'm just giving you the logic for why I don't do it, especially commercially. But there are people that commercially run no-till and grow great flower. It's just you have to be willing to wait longer for those nutrients to work their way down into the soil profile, and that can make nutrient management a little bit more challenging. But yeah, dude, it's totally cool, man. I'm not here to say that that's wrong or bad or anything like that. And I just want to clarify that for people that are doing it. Also,
can I just say one thing, and back to Bill McKibben, because, when we start talking about agronomists, Bill is kind of the mountain, he's who everybody defers to. I don't know.
You took a hit. Yeah. You can't even think.
No. I don't want to kick this anthill. Never mind.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe it was more Billy's comments.
No, I've started enough shit this week.
All right.
I'll leave it alone.
Yes, though, David, I will answer this question and then we'll get back to the other questions. Yeah, mycorrhiza is sensitive to tillage. Bacteria, yeah, correct, not so much. When you do a till or soil disturbance, and keep in mind, like mechanical tillage, very different than me getting in there with my hands in terms of destroying soil structure and damaging microbes. So yes, mycorrhizal fungi is sensitive to tillage. Fungus in general is going to be more affected by it than anything else. Bacteria is pretty tough for it. So
just keep in mind, I'll kick this hill. I'll kick it. And I'm not talking about layering, and I don't want to, arm wrestle anybody about layering right now. If you are a no-till person, just realize that you will get stratification of fertility, and there's 2 areas that are really important. Anything for pH management and anything for phosphorus. pH management, we give that recommendation by volume. And so if you just put that on the surface, you're going to either create a really high or really low pH on the surface, which is not obviously good. And then phosphorus is so highly reactive. Anything you put in, it's going to move a half an inch to an inch on its own. So if you're top dressing with phosphorus, it's never going to get to your plants. So that's as much kicking as I'll do. But those 2 areas, I disagree with the no-till thing. I think it's way more important to get your pH management and your phosphorus down into the root zone. So I guess I'll stand on that.
Okay, this is a good point by Gateway. So yeah, pulling out the root ball, heavy metals accumulate based on the research in the root ball and in the fan leaves more so than the buds. So if we can get those out of the soil, out of our grow, then we're gonna lower the levels. So that's always a good thing, even for medical, just something to consider. All right,
I don't throw them in my compost pile anymore. If I've got root balls, they just go in the trash anymore. I hate to say that, but
yeah. Texas weed hopper, great question. I'm still getting some damage, and there's still a pretty noticeable population, but the plants are big enough now that I'm not too worried about it. They're doing fine. The ones in the bottomless pots are definitely less damaged by the roly-polies than the ones that are directly in the beds. The one in the beds, the roly-polies can just cruise on up. But I'm not doing any trapping or anything special for them at this point. When the plants were smaller, the roly-polies, the isopods, they were a much bigger issue. Now that they're bigger, they kind of outgrown it. But I will say I am seeing damage, like maybe up to a foot up the plant of just them eating that outer layer of the stalk, and it sucks, but it is what it is at this point. I did hear from Saul Alba at BioBee that you could try Sluggo Plus as a possibility for dealing with them. It's a iron phosphate that also has spinosad in there. Spinosad's not approved for all legal markets, but if you're a home grower, you could absolutely use it in your thing. And he seemed to think that might have some efficacy. And then I've seen people do mass trappings with little, beer, like you would with slugs. I saw a pretty cool one of that the other day on Instagram. Sometimes I would just throw a cannabis leaf, fan leaf down there, and then pick it up the next day, and whatever roly-polies were underneath that, I'd take away too. But it's a balance. So some people are saying like, oh, well, it's because the reason you have this problem is because you don't have a cover crop and you don't have a mulch, because they'll eat that. And that could be true, but then I also think I'm also increasing their populations by giving them a much larger food source. And so I'm never going to get rid of this problem, because I'm going to be constantly feeding these roly-polies. And yes, they do cycle nutrients and they're great shredders, but I want just a couple in my bed. I don't want 50 or 1,000 or however many they can get out of hand. So
I was talking to Cleo.
That's where I'm at with it.
I was talking to Cleo at Paradise just yesterday about it, and I mentioned the beer traps, and he said he'd tried that. It didn't work well for him. He does the little, he takes like a piece of paper or a piece of cardboard, cuts a line in it and a hole, slides that to the base of the plant, and then he puts a cone and puts back, double-sided tape. And he tries to trap them that way. Can I comment on one question real quickly, because I just see it going on in the chat from ZZ Trop, because he asked us this question last week when it was me and Ben handling it about the seed increase, and so
this one.
Yeah. So he asked us last week about seed increase. And so, Ben and I weren't 100% sure what he was asking, but if you're trying to make more seeds, I would hunt a particular male rather than doing open pollination, if that was the question. And so if that's the question, yeah, I would take one selected male rather than I'm not going to hit. If I've got a room and I want to hit it with something, I'm not going to use 2 or 3 males of the same. I'm going to use all the same pollen from one plant. So I think that now, with that little bit of extra information, I think that's what they were asking. So hopefully we got it answered.
Yeah. Diatomaceous earth. Sorry, I'm getting caught up in the chat comments instead of the questions that are in the back here. But I think it could have a little bit of efficacy. I don't really know, but the problem with it is, like, how do you keep it consistently on your soil? Because every time it gets wet, it becomes less effective. It will increase your silica, so it's not the end of the world. But if you do use proper PPE. It's a cheap thing you could try. It's not really going to mess too much with your soil fertility. But I haven't seen it really work super well.
I wouldn't think it would work particularly well, just because, like Tad said, as soon as it gets wet, it loses its efficacy, and it's, and pill bugs are fairly large insects, compared to an ant, a house, a little black house ant, or these mites and those kind of things. So it might not be as effective.
Just to clarify, Chad, we're just throwing them out in the woods or something. Brandon lives in the woods. He's not putting it in the actual garbage can. We're just not reusing it in our cannabis grow. So yeah, it's right. Static composting out in the yard somewhere, essentially, if that makes sense. But we don't want to bring it back into the grow. I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, some people, I tried the potato thing too. There's a lot of different ways people can deal with this. And then Gateway talks about how he had it spiral out of control when it's feeding him. So there's some great comments in the chat. Yeah, just want to throw that out there. Okay, back to the questions. I have about 5 minutes before I have to go pick up my daughter, so we will have to come back to these later. But this is a great question. I definitely wanted to answer. Billy asks, if we're testing our soil, should we test our compost as well? Brandon.
That depends on what you're doing with that compost. So if you're using compost for a compost tea, I don't think that's important to test, as long as you know that you've got a safe, I always want to know carbon to nitrogen ratio, pH, a couple things if I'm going to add compost to an existing bed. And I'll do that like every 6 to 8 rounds. I'll add some compost and a little bit of aeration. I think it's important to know what you're adding. Obviously all composts are not made the same. Some composts come in with a lot of fertility. Most of them come in with biology. Some of them come in with really high bad actors, sodium and chlorides and that kind of stuff. If you're talking about compost for, making your own soil, your own substrate, absolutely crucial. Before you even start the process, I would want to test my compost and, check off, pH, carbon to nitrogen ratio, sodium, chlorides, and heavy metals before I, went into, using that to make an actual substrate. So
yeah,
depends on the use.
One tip on that is you could just create a base mix too. Like ours is 50% peat, about 15% compost, 33% pumice, and then we have some biochar in there and some worm castings. So that's just kind of our rough ratio, but a lot of people follow the Coots mix, which is the Cornell method, which is a third compost, a third aeration, and a third peat moss. And so you can do that. I don't think you need that much compost because the compost does bring in a lot more variability, but you could mix your soil first, your base mix, test that, and then adjust it based on your analysis. So rather than doing a separate test for your compost, you can just know that like if your chlorides are high, your sodium's high, your ammonia's high, that's not coming from your aeration or your peat moss. It's going to be coming from your compost. And so you can kind of make adjustments based on that. So that might save a few bucks too, because compost testing is expensive.
Yeah. So it really, yeah. Just depends on how much control and knowledge you want about your substrate. I tend to want all the knowledge and information I can get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cornell.
All right. Do you want to? We got 2 minutes, so I got 2 more good questions here. Let's see if we can do one in a minute. And then we'll do one more.
Okay. Yeah. So great question. So I lived in South Carolina for the past 25 years. I live in Western Washington. Both areas are areas of extremely high humidity. And so in these environments, comfrey is a literal powdery mildew factory. And so I have gone around here. When I moved into this property, there was a bunch of comfrey, and I grow outdoor cannabis. And so I don't want to be just pumping as many spores into the air as possible. And so I dug up all the comfrey. Comfrey's wonderful. If you put me on a desert island, I would love to have comfrey. It's great for breaking up your soil. It's great if you're like a K&F ferment wizard. It's great for like so many things. It makes a really great mulch. It's got no fiber. It breaks down immediately. Like it's really interesting. I planted it under all my fruit trees because I was in heavy clay, just to help my trees in South Carolina. And so I like comfrey, and it has a lot of really great uses, and it's one of the kind of cornerstone plants for organics. So I don't hate it, but I hate on it because I just don't want the extra fungal pathogen pressures. So that's the only reason.
Yeah, it has a really deep taproot. It's really good at accessing nutrients deep in the soil. It's a wonderful permaculture plant. One thing I will add is you are making a lifetime commitment to this plant if you do plant it. And then if someone disturbs it, like at my farm when I had Kiss Farm, employees would accidentally dig up a little bit, and a quarter inch, half inch of a root by itself will start a new plant. And now you have a comfrey forest growing before you know it. And it's nearly impossible to get rid of. So that's one of my issues with it, but it's a phenomenally cool plant. And we're talking about Bocking 14. Don't assume all comfrey is the same. There's sterile varieties, and even the sterile varieties can get out of control. All right, we are out of time. I'm going to take one more question, though, because I think there's a lot of good ones. But Arthur asked, if I want to have an outdoor container garden and want to use native soil for my food and medicine, what should I be concerned about? It's a great question. So there's the main things to be concerned about are heavy metals, like where I live. I've talked about this before. There was an aluminum and metal smelter 5-10 miles away from where we moved to, and now this whole area has like 50 to 500 ppm of lead and arsenic in it. It's really unfortunate. And so I would not grow any food in my soil. I've actually I put a layer of arborist chips, and then I brought in our KISS soil and put that in the beds because I didn't want to risk my family being exposed to that. That's not the case for most people, but having a good idea of heavy metals is a big one. The other issue with native soil is what Brandon talked about before. So understanding the physical properties of that soil. The soil around here is very high clay. It's not going to be ideal without modification for growing your food and your medicine. So you would need to bring in compost or some sort of organic matter to balance that out. So think about the physical properties. How well does it drain? What kind of air exchange do I have in it? And then lastly would be sort of fertility. So think about some areas of the country have soil the pH might be very far off. It might be very alkaline or calcareous soils that are very high in calcium. So those are the biggest things. The only other thing I want to add is native soil is going to weigh a heck of a lot more. So if you have to move these pots around, they're going to be really heavy. But other than that, yeah, absolutely. If you have good native soil, you can definitely grow in it. And I highly suggest that. Being in a container is a little bit harder than being in the ground. So if you have good native soil, I wouldn't even bother with the containers. I would just go right into the ground. Go ahead, Brandon.
I just want to add a couple of things to that real quickly. So I'm super uptight about IPM. I would definitely get something aggressive like trichoderma, lactobacillus, Bacillus subtilis. I would want to get something into that native soil just because we have no idea what pathogens are in there. And then I would probably want to get a bunch of Bovaria in there to, just in case. Like the last thing you want to do is, get some rice root aphids from your potato farm and throw that into a pot. And now the only thing it can feed on is your cannabis plant. So I would worry about pests and pathogens also. And then if you are close to, like Tad was mentioning the smelter, not just heavy metals. If you're in ag country, you could have E. coli runoff from your cattle neighbors. You could have mycetes. You could have, which I always say that wrong, but you could have pesticide runoff. You could have, so you really want to, take that 10,000 foot view of your property and see who your neighbors are and see what could be getting into your water source and all that kind of stuff.
All right, guys, I got to go pick up my daughter from preschool, but I just screenshotted all the questions from this, so we will tackle them next week. Yes, and this video will be available on our YouTube under the live tab, along with all the other ones we've done, so you guys can always go back and check them out. And I really appreciate everyone tuning in today. Have a wonderful day. Happy growing.
Be well.